Hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Ninjutsu Podcast. I'm your host, Don Rowley. This time around is going to be kind of short. I just want to talk about a concept and ways of looking at training. So I recently heard something that supposedly was attributed to Bruce Lee to the effect of, how would you train if you knew that you had to fight for your life tomorrow? And it's an interesting question. Obviously, some people think, okay, you should get rid of certain things and just concentrate on that, and that is how you should do your training. I'd like to point out that's not really the case if you've got time, okay? Give you an example, okay? So, back in the day, I went through emergency medical technician training, EMT. A few years later in Abujikan Dojo, as a matter of fact, there was one of the other students that was talking about him going through medical training, okay? So he was giving some questions, about symptoms and stuff like that was perplexing him. And I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, I know these things. These are fairly obvious to tell what's going on. And so he wasn't going through medical school, he was going through pre-medical school. And I don't know why he had the questions, but evidently he had some medical questions that he had trouble answering that I could, on the spot, tell what's going on and give an answer. However, if you think about it, now, decades later, a lot more time than I like to admit, if you had a medical emergency, would you prefer him or would you prefer me? The simple fact is the emergency medical technician class was short term. It was like only a few months, and it went a certain ways. A certain amount of knowledge was given to me, and no more. So that's how do you which do you want? If you've got years and years to practice, how do you practice? And this is how the Japanese train. Remember, the warrior class of Japan was basically born into them. You were born into, a samurai. You were born a cat maybe, if you were lucky. But then from childhood you would start training. So you would not be expected to go into battle the next day. So you could set a foundation. This is something that my teacher in Japan, my first teacher in Japan, basically stated that, pointed out that there's jutsu and there's waza. Waza means technique. Jutsu, also sometimes called sube. I've never heard it used that, but means art. And again, getting back to medicine, the Japanese term for surgery is shujutsu, hand art. And he basically said, now if you are on the table, do you want someone, if something gets nicked and there's a hemorrhaging, do you want someone that knows everything completely, all the principles, everything to the very basics built up? Or do you want someone with a color by numbers type of training? That's it. That's art as compared to techniques. And so when training, we can lay down the foundation. We can afford to take years, unless of course you're in a situation like the military. I went through military training, and within a matter of a few months, you are trained as a military officer, a military personnel. But again, you can get better. It's not a perfect analogy, but yeah, you're 18 years old. You're young, and the combative training they give works very well at that age. Doesn't work that great anymore at my age. The stuff that works at my age is the stuff that, call it old man jutsu. And instead of having to rely on strength, you rely on skill. And again, that skill has to be built up over time. Even, like combat sports, boxing. If a boxer was getting ready to fight the next day for his life, he would not put in any jump rope training. But jump rope training is a very important type of training to build up skills. It's not an immediate result, but it is a very, very valuable skill. And everyone that really does boxing does jump roping. And this is, we've seen this with some people. Again, I'm going to, one of the differences between Stephen Hayes' Toshindo and Bunjikan is that, we have things like Sanshin. And I saw something about, he was writing about Sanshin, and he will not do Sanshin because it's not a combat, as is techniques. It is not something that was used, none of the techniques, which is very simple stuff, it was used on the battlefield. And he's missing the point. It's not supposed to be techniques used per se. They're more like jumping rope, except they're about, generating power, putting all that power into one area, maintaining balance, taking balance, things like that. It builds up skills inside of you that become a default setting, so that when somebody is actually trying to, bust your head open, that you don't have to worry if your knee is on line with your toe for the most perfect conveyance of power into the person, or that you're able to transition from one leg to the other perfectly without losing balance. That's supposed to be the default setting for things like the San Shin. It's not something to be used as is. It is a skill set. It is like learning Clary Loon or the chords of an instrument. It's not, they help you to be able to do improvised jazz. They are not improvised jazz. But, if you just try to do improvisation with a musical instrument without getting all these, seemingly unrelated, if you don't think about it, skills, then, you're not going to get any good. You just want to get to the straight things. I mean, I've known people that want to go straight into conversational classes for different languages. And no. You got to learn grammar. You got to learn a few things. And as boring as it is, and it's not immediately useful, it does set the foundation for greatness later on. And that is how you should approach training. Just remember that, in the Bujinkan, these were family traditions. People were learned from a young age. So some of the stuff that you learn at the beginning is not going to be effective for a couple of years maybe. Once you get there, then you're going to be better than the person that, got through like a 2 months combative course. And as you go on, hopefully speaking, you will get better and better. Instead of being, combatives, it's hard to get much better than you were at the end of basic training. But that's it. You've got to have the long view. You've got to, be patient. You've got to lay the foundation, do the work, and be ready to put in a lot of effort before you see any immediate results in combat efficiency. That's it for this time. Thanks a lot, folks. See you next time.